Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Empower LEP Podcast. I'm your host, Jana Parker, licensed educational psychologist, group practice owner, and mentor at Empower LEP. Today, I am so excited to host Dr. Julie Gettman. She is the executive director of the School Neuropsychology Institute, and she's the owner of MindWorks Assessment, which is a private practice specializing in comprehensive neurocognitive assessment for children and adolescents. She is a licensed school psychologist, a nationally certified school psychologist, and she earned her diplomate in school neuropsychology from the American Board of School Neuropsychology. She has 28 years of experience as a clinician and a consultant in public school, at university, in test publishing, in private practice, and in forensic settings. Today, we talk all about Julie and her path to private practice, but we really dig into training in neuropsychology and the term neuropsychology. I brought her on because this is something that we talk about on social media, and I thought it was really relevant to our conversation and to just bring on the executive director of the School Neuropsych Institute. So I really hope that you enjoy this talk as much as I did, and enjoy. All right, welcome back to the Empower LEP Podcast. I'm here today with Dr. Julie Gettman. Julie, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here, Jana. Thank you.
I'm really excited because this is Dr. Gettman's first podcast. So I feel very honored.
And please call me Julie.
I will. Okay. I will. I know that's hard. So I have had the pleasure of talking to you several times at different conferences that I've been to recently, and I've heard you speak several times as well, and with Chris Bedford. And so it's been really nice to get to know you a little bit over the course of the past couple of years. I'm excited for you and Chris taking over for the School Neuropsych Institute for Dan Miller, and I want to hear a little bit about that transition and how it's been. And I, wish that I had been able to take the Institute while you were there, but I did it so long ago that I didn't. But one of my clinicians is actually going through it this year. And so she's going to start in August. And so I told her I would sit in on some stuff with her and kind of see her through the process. So.
Oh, fantastic. So you can take advantage of some of the changes since you took the program.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yes.
I know. And
I'm just excited to be here. You always come and talk to us, and you're this amazing presenter yourself, and I'm impressed by this new business adventure that you're on.
Thank you. Yeah. It's been really exciting. And so this is really about, helping people kind of find their way and navigate a world that's kind of unknown in private practice. And so I'm doing my best to bring on people who can talk about their own journey into private practice, and also, kind of inspire the field, and also to share content knowledge as well. And so I think we're going to do a little bit of both, which I'm really excited about. So
that's good.
Thanks for being here. Okay, so Julie, where you went to school, not in California, you were in Colorado, and then how did you learn, because you have a private practice, and
yes.
did any of your education teach you about how to open a private practice?
Absolutely not. But that was okay, because at that time in my life, I was preparing for a career in schools, at that time in my life. And that's what I did for the first 10 years of my life. Well, only in the schools for about the first 5 years of my career. And then I was in Florida by that time. I did my training in Colorado, University of Colorado undergraduate, University of Denver for my graduate degrees. And then I was in Tampa, Florida for about 20 years after that. And similar to California state laws, there is an allowance for private practice for school psychologists. So I was only in the schools in isolation for the first 5 years. And then I also had a private practice on the side, but, full-time in schools for the first 10 years of my career. So I feel like my training was, it prepared me very well for that setting. It wasn't focused on how to run a business, how to start a business, and all of those types of aspects. So I learned that later on.
Okay. And so so you're saying you were in schools full-time, you were in schools for 10 years, but full-time for 5. So did you start to transition into a private practice during those other 5?
Yes, well, full-time schools for 10 years.
But
okay. I had a side practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Once I was licensed for private practice in Florida.
Got it. Okay.
All right.
I did.
And that did not use any specific business model. It was pretty haphazard. It was a side job. So that was fine at that time.
Yeah.
And actually, it was my side job for a lot longer than that. Because after I was in the schools for 10 years, I worked full-time for PAR, Psychological Assessment Resources, as our senior clinical assessment consultant for about 15 years, while also having a private practice. So I was doing a lot of private practice work, but it wasn't my main source of income. It was really kind of what brought me the most joy, quite honestly, because I was doing the work like I wanted to do it in a way that I felt was beneficial, but I was really just flying by the seat of my pants for those first years until I decided that I needed to spend more time doing what gave me the most joy.
Right.
Yep. And so I jumped off a cliff and I left my corporate job and I started a private practice full time without benefits and all of, the niceties and kind of that layer of protection that we have working for any business, right? Any type of corporation, or business, even school districts or more traditional corporate environments.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big shift in my life, for sure.
Yeah. Did you how did you figure out how to do it all?
Sure. I will say that my experience working for a corporate business was extremely beneficial.
Yeah.
And that was my first transition, was transitioning from schools full-time to a corporate position, because some of the focus changes and what the importance of doing business to stay afloat becomes primary, and the importance of marketing and sales and the image is primary in those types of settings. And so that was my first shift away from schools. The end game is still what benefits clients, but I had to be in an organization where the real bottom line was you had to stay afloat, you had to make money, and you had to protect your image, and you had to market your image. So I learned a lot of lessons that way. I learned how to make connections with people that will benefit your business. I learned a lot about seeking contacts and really being able to present a polished, professional look to a business. And sometimes we may not think about that because, we are focused on doing what's best for our clients, and that should be a focus, but people aren't going to come to you unless you have the rest of those pieces. So I will say that working for a corporate environment through PAR was extremely beneficial. And I think that they had a very solid, caring leadership team. So I think that was helpful as well in learning, how to be a compassionate leader that cares about, clients and people around them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then you transitioned into your private practice, and do you have anybody who works for you or with you in this practice? Because sounds like you developed a lot of those kinds of skills, but are you just kind of solo, or are you working with other people?
Yeah, I was just solo in my private practice.
Okay.
You know, things are a little bit different now, although I still have my private practice. But again, I again have this, dual lifestyle, actually a three-pronged career now. So my sole private practice, as having my private practice as my only thing that I did, was, about 5 years or so.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, but I've had it since 2004, I think, is when I first was licensed. So it's been in different forms, but I really had to work hard those few years. But I became successful in the sole private practice, I think, because of the connections. I reached out. I reached out to private schools that were near me. I offered a lot of workshops for staff and parents. I made a lot of connections with practitioners that work with the same type of children that I saw. So speech language therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, audiologists, and I had really good conversations with them. Yeah. And found groups of people in my community that were also doing really good work. And I felt like they were on the same page that I was in working with children, and formed those connections, because you need to have a pipeline.
Absolutely. I have definitely found that because I have a community-based practice, that's where you have, cross-referral network. And really, for me, it's been a lot about me wanting to know the other people who I can refer to, because I want to know what kind of support the students that I'm working with are going to get once they leave me. Right. But then it really works both ways, because if they need somebody to do the evaluation, then I might be top of mind, or they might appreciate my style, or, we've just connected. So I think that is, a great way to go if you have a community-based practice.
Absolutely. And knowing the right people to refer to then circles back to your referrals from prior clients, which is also another piece about, that I use for growing my business. I had just gone through the school neuropsych program, the postgraduate program. I had this new skill set that I learned, that I found extremely beneficial working with my clients. I felt like I could really meet their needs in ways that I wasn't able to before. And then that was really, the other referral source was prior clients, or school staff that received my reports, or maybe their own practitioners or providers that I hadn't met with, but that they gave the report to their speech language therapist, or their occupational therapist, or their counselor.
Yeah.
So, excuse my energy efficient lights.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is also the heart of it. You do good work, and, you provide something that gives the client something meaningful, and that also generates, your referrals.
Right, right. And so the three-prong of your life right now is?
So I do private practice work. And I also, I evolved into doing some expert witness work. So I had the opportunity to do a significant amount of postdoctoral training with a clinical neuropsychologist that's a specialist in brain injury, and does a lot of expert witness work. So I, throughout some of these transitions, was able to get direct supervision from her and training in this area. And so I do some of that work. I don't do a lot of that work. It is very time intensive. And it's somewhat stressful work because it is legal work, and they're in-depth cases. They're often very medically involved cases. But that is part of my practice, although it's small, it is very intense when it happens.
Right.
And then the third prong is my role now with the School Neuropsychology Institute, which began as working for Dr. Dan Miller for several years on a part-time basis. And then Chris Bedford and myself, then the business transitioned to us on January 1. So now I'm the executive director of that program and couldn't be more happy about that. So that prong is becoming a bit bigger now since we took over. So, it's a juggling game as far as how much to take on and each piece.
When you started working for Dr. Miller, was this even something that you thought would happen?
It's a great story. And sometimes I think of my life like, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky, right? Because I really feel like I'm doing a lot of things that coincide with some of these ideals that I had early on in my life. And it's kind of come full circle. And I'd like to say it's luck, but I also feel like I spent some time, making connections with people that care about kids, that had similar viewpoints regarding how to do assessment in a meaningful way. And again, people that were kind and really were in this field to promote the well-being of children. So I feel like part of it was just fostering, those connections over time and reaching out to people and not being afraid to go and talk to people and follow up with people, right?
Yep.
So I got to know Dan through my work in PAR. And got to know the neuropsychology world too through my work in PAR. PAR started as a neuropsychology company. I was able to connect with neuropsychology thought leaders, all over the United States. And so, fostering those relationships was beneficial. And so one day Dan just approached Chris and I and, presented this idea. So it was out of the blue. And that way, and got a little hoarse voice over the last couple of weeks, but it's getting better. You can hear it, I'm sure.
It's okay.
So although that was definitely out of the blue, in hindsight, I think it was a good fit.
Yeah.
Chris and I both have, our strengths in different areas, and we complement each other pretty well in a business sense. And so, that offer was, while it was a surprise, I think it has ended up to be a good fit for the company.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm excited to hear about, what's coming. But it's kind of, it's just resonating with me what you say about like making connections and talking to people. And I mean, I remember being a young school psychologist and being at conferences and just being like, oh, like these people who are so, and now I kind of feel like I've always been the kind of person who, if I'm listening to somebody present and I'm really interested in what they're saying, like I want to like know more. I want to be involved. And I guess I stopped fearing, like I got to a point where you go like, oh, these people are just like me. They just might be a little older, or they might have had a different experience, or maybe they're even a little younger. They're just different, but they're just like me. And you realize that people who are interested in something, if you're interested in it too, then you're probably going to want to talk, right? And so if I, was like learning about a new test kit or, and, oh, tell me about this and about that. And then I got to know a lot of people in this field at conferences. And it just, you realize like, oh, everybody really does want to connect. They're not just like, oh, I'm over here giving my presentation. Really, they're like, oh, you guys are school psychologists too. Like, let's talk about this or really dig in. And I got, kind of less afraid to do stuff like that. But in doing so and making those connections, I started to just have more opportunities, right?
Yes,
You know?
absolutely. And I think also conferences sometimes can be very overwhelming for a lot of people. There's a lot of things to do. There's during the conference, in the evenings, it feels like there's a million different places you can be. So I would also say if you reach out and somebody doesn't have the time at the conference, to follow up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Follow up, reach out, see if you can have a conversation. And I think that you're right. Most people are in this field because they're helpers.
Right.
You might, there's always going to be a few people that are, promoting only their own ideas or only their theories. And that's going to be the majority of your conversation with them. But I think for most people, no matter who they are, they want to inspire the next generation and they want to inspire good practice with kids.
Yeah.
So I think our field in particular, there's less risk in putting yourself out there with people that you admire or want to learn from.
Yeah. And I think the same goes for the experience that you get working in schools and even in like different schools or different school districts, because you get to know a lot of people that way. So, kind of thinking about building your business, depending on your clientele, the more people you know, the more connections you have made, even within the school districts, is going to be helpful for you in developing a practice, because potentially you're going to work on contracts with schools, so the more administrators in school districts that you have a connection to, the better. So I think experience and like meeting people and those connections across the board, whether it's with other professional school psychologists or just in your school districts or in multiple school districts, right? Or in private schools, all of that is going to help. It's going to help your professional practice, but also present you with more opportunities that you didn't even know existed.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because I do think that that is another reason why my practice became pretty well known, was because I worked for a very large school district. Yeah. And there were a lot of school psychologists in the district and that I knew across the whole. I worked for Hillsborough County School District, and that they are very large. We had at that time probably 150 school psychologists. And I know that there are districts in California that are that size, and sometimes they're smaller. But if your experience has been in a smaller district, getting to know the other school psychologists in your state and area, doing workshops at your local organizations or for their school district, or whatever you can to get your name out there to other school psychologists as well is beneficial. You are absolutely right.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I think that there's a theme running along like a lot of these interviews that I'm doing with people. Number one, there's a lot about this connectivity piece. And number two, it's that school psychologists want to do like 10 jobs at once. We are all just like, I want to do this and this and this, yeah. So that's been pretty funny too.
Yes. I would also say, and this goes back to doing good work, is be a lifelong learner.
Mm-hmm. That's one of my values. It's like literally my last like core value in my company is lifelong learner. Yeah,
absolutely. We all get comfortable. Life is busy and it takes some extra effort, to be a lifelong learner. But whether it's reading research even, or a new book, or any of that stuff. It's hard to fit it in, especially with personalities that like to do more than one job.
Mhm.
But maybe your job for a while is just to learn the latest and update your skills.
It's funny you say that. Like, as you say that, I'm looking at my best practices in school neuropsychology, which is a very nice book that I have not opened yet, but I bought it when it came out. It's right there,
Yes.
But
I will say that book sometimes is helpful when you have a particular type of case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that is one use for the book, as well as is like a desk reference for, I have this type of kid.
Right.
And I'm going to, read a little bit more about that type of kid and what some expert says about how to do assessment and intervention with that type of kid.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that, because I will remember to crack it open. But no, I think that this field is just so cool because it's always changing and evolving and growing. And I always tell people who I'm presenting to, if you have something, get up here and present, there are only so many of us who will stand up and give a talk, because it is hard to plan these talks, right? But if you can do it, you should do it, because we learn from each other, so I always encourage people to get up and talk if they have something to.
And I think in particular, talks that are from a practitioner viewpoint resonate well with people.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that research-oriented doesn't, because that is extremely important too, to get that information out. But someone that's taking the research and how it applies to daily practice, to this is what I do with clients, I think those are particularly well received.
Absolutely. All right. So on that note, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about neuropsychology, because there's been a lot of chatter and a lot of different ideas about the term, about who's qualified to do what, about, do you say you do neuropsychological assessment? When is it okay to do that or not? And so I just thought I would love to have that conversation with you, because you do trainings on this and you are in this field and you run the School Neuropsychology Institute. So who better than to talk about it than you?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to do that. We get a lot of questions about this through the School Neuropsychology Institute. There's a fair amount of chatter on social media. Mm-hmm. Chris and I had a couple invited workshops at NASP this year. And one of them, we tried to do some education around this issue in particular, because it is confusing. It is not clear cut in most situations. And there's a lot of turf wars in this area. So we started with some education about what neuropsychology is. And I think most people understand that, but it is the application of brain basis to what we do. So there's always some connection to what we know about neuroanatomy and neurological basis of issues. And it's keeping that at the forefront of our mind when doing assessment. So it's not just about the score per se, but it is what neuroanatomical conditions led to that type of presentation, what was behind the score, what are all the things that the brain had to do to solve that problem. And when you understand that connection more deeply, then you're able to pick things apart when there's a low score and consider things much more broadly than you would if you were just looking at the score and what the manual says that test measures, right?
Yes.
So that's kind of the basis. And there's different areas that have developed. Psychology has a lot of areas of specialty. So neuropsychology developed, school psychology developed, school neuropsychology started to develop like in the 1980s even were some of the first articles and that wrote about a subset of school psychology that's focused on neuropsychology. In the broader range of psychology, one of the guidelines that evolved was called the Houston Conference. And I don't know if you're familiar with that or what that meant, but in the clinical psychology realm, the Houston Conference was in 1990s, late 1990s. And it said, this is a type of training you need to be a neuropsychologist. And the issue is that term is not protected, even though there are these guidelines, APA's perspective on it, that these are idealistic guidelines. They're pretty narrow. It would require someone to know fairly early on, unless you're one of those individuals that can go back to school later on, which is very difficult, right? After you're out and you have a career and you have a family, it's more difficult to go back. So know early on to get the right type of program, the right type of internship, the right type of sanctioned 2-year postdoc residency.
Right.
That is a stretch goal for most people. And APA recognizes that these are not legally mandated, even though that might be the ideal. So that is one kind of, this is what neuropsychology is, okay. Right? The only states that I know of currently, the last time I looked, that have a mandate on using the term neuropsychology are Louisiana and Texas. They actually have standards that I think Louisiana, you have to be board certified by, there's a few board certifications that you need to have in order to use that term. And Texas had some wording around Houston Conference guidelines. So I know I haven't found that California has that. But always be aware, look at your regs, things change. Mm-hmm. So that's, one thing that practitioners need to be broadly aware of is what does your state say about usage of that term? Mm-hmm. And then you get into, school psychology, and school neuropsychology.
Let me just ask a question. So are you saying that would be a board certified clinical neuropsychologist is what you're talking about, kind of?
Yes, those Houston Conference is broadly, those are requirements in general for clinical psychologists, but a school psychologist, doctoral level school psychologist, could go through those steps too.
Okay.
If you went through an APA approved doctoral program, you had an APA approved internship, and you then were able to obtain a sanctioned 2-year postdoc somewhere, you could potentially fulfill Houston guidelines.
Okay. And what is this the same thing as a pediatric neuropsychologist?
Great question. So pediatric neuropsychology in the broad term, not, school neuropsychology, but pediatric neuropsychology, that was later to develop even than that. And that was difficult because the guidelines that were out there and the training programs that were offered were often required someone to do lifespan psychology and neuropsychology. So that area of really specializing in kids, that was difficult in the psychology realm as well, because there wasn't a lot that was specific to them. That has improved over time. There's now a board certification, American Board of Pediatric Neuropsychology, ABPDN, that's clinical. There's American Board of School Neuropsychology that's child focused. Those are really well, actually, there's one more now. Those two are child focused. Just recently, sometimes I get my acronyms mixed up, but the board certification is through the American Board of Professional Psychology, ABPP. They used to be only lifespan. They recently developed a pediatric neuropsychology specialty too, but that hasn't been that many years.
So this is so interesting. So let me ask this question, because there are lots of like a doctoral level clinical psychologist, like a licensed clinical psychologist, and then they call themselves a pediatric neuropsychologist. Mm-hmm. And so the certification for pediatric neuropsychology, what kind of training does that require post-clinical program versus like board certified school neuropsychology program, right? What's the difference? Because I'm like, well, what kind of training do these people have, right? And like, what makes them more qualified than me, or are they?
So again, neuropsychology is not a protected term in most states. So let me preface what I'm about to say by that. Okay. And in fact, APA did a study in 2017. About 9% of APA psychologists consider themselves neuropsychologists. Only about a quarter of them are board certified. So there is a difference between calling yourself a neuropsychologist and calling yourself a board certified neuropsychologist. Mm-hmm. In most states, both of those are allowed in some fashion or accepted as long as you have adequate training or experience in that area. But it's a unclear boundary because you have Houston Conference guidelines, which are the ideal. And you will find people, out there that say, don't use that term unless you have met Houston Conference guidelines. But there's only one board there are several different certification boards in clinical psychology. ABPP requires Houston Conference as of about 5 years ago. You have to meet Houston Conference guidelines in order to have that board certification. There are other clinical neuropsychology boards that, yes, that's the ideal. Some of them require a 2-year postdoc in neuropsychology. Some require, it may not have to be an APA approved, but it can be comparable or supervision in some sort of way. So there are gray areas all around this. What it comes down to, in my opinion, is our ethical responsibility to be competent. Mm-hmm. In the area that we practice. We all know that psychology has a lot of different wheelhouses. Not all of them have a board certification for all of those wheelhouses. Mm-hmm. But it is our ethical responsibility to practice in the wheelhouses where we are competent. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. There might be a day when this is all legally mandated. I don't know if it will. I will say that there is so APA was in Minnesota last year, 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, something like that. Anyway, so now there is the Minnesota Conference neuropsychology guidelines, which are being developed. Oh. They are being developed because of this realization that there's not enough training programs that are specific to this. And we know this from school psychology. The number of school psychology programs that focus on neuropsychology is very, very small.
Yep.
And I think the same thing applies to clinical psychology programs. So they want to influence that so there's more possibilities for people to be competent.
Mm-hmm.
And also the realization that those guidelines, they want to create guidelines that provide more equitable access, especially, for different races, ethnic, socioeconomic. They want to make sure that developing that type of competency and being accepted is available to a broader subset. So that's in progress. Those haven't been developed. So we don't even know what that's going to look like yet.
Yeah. Well, so yeah. So go ahead.
I want you to go ahead. Were you going to start talking about school neuropsychology?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was going to ask. Yeah, perfect. That's why I was like, no, you go, because I can tell that's where you're going. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So this field, there was really nothing. There were articles and books, and this realization that, all of these kids come to school. All of the medically fragile kids come to school. All of the children with neurological insults, they come to school. And in the school systems, we not only diagnose, but we have to treat. We have to figure out how they're going to learn. That is a big ask.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, I think is a harder job than just that diagnostic piece, because we have to figure out how to transition that to school. And there are more of us. There is if you look at the numbers, there's one pediatric neuropsychologist for every, I forget, 20,000 children. But we all know what the wait lists are like.
Right.
To get a pediatric neuropsych evaluation at most clinics and hospitals.
Yeah.
It's a long time. We have the opportunity to try to influence these kids and the kids that can't afford it, and, make it a more equitable opportunity for kids to have something that considers brain basis. So those were all the things that were the ideas.
Yeah.
Books, Hale Fiorello, Elaine Fletcher Jansen, Cecil Reynolds, lots of people wrote. But quite honestly, Dan Miller was the only one that really put it together in a separate program to develop competency outside of a few programs in school psychology that integrated neuropsychology concepts.
Yeah.
That's dwindling these days, quite honestly. The number of programs that do that.
Oh, I would think it would be more popular. I would think it would be more popular.
Well, I think that there are, school psychology programs have to integrate a lot. They have to teach a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they, also have to teach, progress monitoring and RTI and curriculum-based measurement and all of these things. Is you got to know it all. And it just depends on what is mandated by training programs at this time.
Yeah.
So
yep.
Sometimes the neuropsychology aspects aren't as required. So those might go to the wayside, even though, of course, I have a bias. That's important.
Yeah.
But so he's really the one that put together a sequence course of study. And it started from a department outside of TWU that was funded by TWU about lifelong learning. And, he put it together, and it evolved over time from in-person to online, so it was more accessible.
Yeah.
It is not as comprehensive as a, 2-year postdoc in person by far, but it is extremely targeted to the application of this information to what it means for a child in an educational environment and their career and the application of it to real life.
Mm-hmm.
So that was how that evolved. And then board certification as well. If you are interested in board certification in that area. So all of these things, whether it be clinical psychology or school neuropsychology, evolved from this need to develop competency in these areas.
So, and just so you know, like we have more time than I had told you at the beginning. So, because I want to spread this out a little bit longer because I feel like I have more questions. So we have like an extra 10 minutes. So,
okay, great.
So I would love to know then, like, kind of take us into what you learn in this certification program and what the difference is, because I think a lot of school psychologists are doing a lot of work in going to continuing education and professional development, or, going through things with PSW and, looking at things through a neuropsychological lens, which I think you can do a lot of stuff on your own. Why would someone want to come and do this certification? And then is there I can say I do it because I went through a certification, or I shouldn't say I do it because I didn't go through a certification, how do you navigate that?
Sure. So
that was a lot of questions. Sorry, like all in one.
That's okay.
I think you'll get to it.
How about if I start with what I perceive to be the benefits?
Great.
One is it's intensive. It requires you to not only learn, but develop competency. So you have to demonstrate that you've actually learned the information, not only the knowledge base, but that you can demonstrate those skills working with children. You have direct clinical supervision, group supervision, and it's very targeted, again, to what we do either in private practice with kids or in schools with kids. So I think that's a little bit different flavor than getting continuing education right here.
Yeah.
It is not, again, this is stuff that's not legally mandated. You may have an opportunity to, get a postdoc. You might be in that situation where you've done all the pieces in education so you can get the postdoc. Or you might get supervision. It may not fulfill Houston Conference or those types of guidelines, but supervision or be in a setting where you get supervision from another school neuropsychologist or a clinical neuropsychologist. I think the important piece is making sure that you have the ability to demonstrate it in real world settings and have supervision from people that already have competency in that area. So trying to think about what the next piece is. I think I addressed the continuing education versus the sequence of study.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
The other thing about the sequence of study is this has been a long-term researched, written about methodology that tries to encompass the very broad areas, all of the broad areas in the neuropsychology realm. So that is the other issue with the sequence course of study, is that you're really trying to hit on the important issues and hearing from experts all over that may have different perspectives to bring in to your practice. When to use it and when to not. So the question came up about PSW or CHC, and both of those developed based on, on neuropsychological theory and thinking, right? It got into, let's think about the processes that impact education. I think some of the main differences are that both of those address mostly learning disabilities. Which is great. I mean, that's the most common thing that we that we deal with are learning disabilities. So that is important. The heart of a broader neuropsychology program is not just learning disabilities. It is the family, the family medical, psychiatric history, how a child perceives information, how they process information. It focuses on finding out how they got the score, not so much on how discrepant the scores were, but why that score is discrepant and what that means from a perspective of how they perceive information and process information.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand that level if you're going to pick apart why that score was low. It can be researched that a low score on this subtest correlates with a reading disability or a different type of disability. But they may have obtained that score maybe because they have a neurological makeup of a child with a reading disability, but there can be many other reasons based on that individual child
Mm-hmm.
and how they perceive information with their eyes and their ears and put it together and how they organize information. What strategies do they develop as they're solving problems? All those things play into that low score. So I think that's a bit of the difference too, is it's less about the score, but what's behind the score.
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear you talking about this because I'm like, I don't even remember what it's like to not do that, and and it's actually like when I have new clinicians in my office and we're going through cases, and these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. And it reminds me that not everybody gets trained that way. Right. So,
Yes.
And sometimes I'm like, am I still doing like school neuropsychology? Right. Because it's been so long since I took that program, but you're making me feel like, yes, I am. Like, yes, I am doing that. And it's just like part of how I evaluate. Like people ask when they call, well, are you doing psychoed or neuropsych assessment? I'm like, to me, it's all blurred lines now. Like, because how do I only do psychoed? Like there wouldn't ever be a time unless someone was like, I just need like a reevaluation for accommodations for college and to show one low score. I mean, which I don't need, you know what I mean? Like I still would be like, well, why is this happening for you? Like I still would never do that. Yeah. So I think it really did do that for me in my practice, even though I can barely remember way back when I took this, but yeah.
Sure. I remember my early days and the pressure, and I just needed the score discrepancy. And I wrote about the score and what the manual said that score measured, which almost nobody understands.
Right.
And talked about the score and the ranges in meetings.
Right.
And now I don't.
Right.
That's important. I love scores. It's my gauge, but it's the big picture. It's the brain basis. It's why they got those scores, what we can do to pull out those good strategies to help them.
Yeah.
What do I see in this child? In the schools, you might be the first person who identifies something. I had a student. The child was having absence seizures. She was able to pick things apart and kind of rule a lot of other things out. And that's powerful. There's all these kids out here. We might be the first line.
Right.
We need that education, in my opinion,
mm-hmm.
to be able to link these these core senses and sensor motor abilities to what might be going on with that child.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. I think our work is so important. And I think that this level of training, I'm, just thinking about what this has done for me in my practice and just like reflecting like this, it really has brought me to a different place where I couldn't go backwards. I couldn't go backwards to doing less than what I do now, which is actually why for me, I can't go back to being a school psychologist. And I don't say that in like any kind of negative way. But for me, if I had to be in that boundary, I would have a hard time.
Sure.
But if I never left that boundary, I would be able to practice within it with this new way of thinking too, so I highly recommend this training for school psychologists. And I also recommend it, especially for people who are getting out of school, not especially, but also for people who are not going to be in schools, because if you're doing private practice evaluations and you are doing a regular school psychology, psychoeducational evaluation, I think the expectation is that there will be more than that, or like the parents are paying for you to answer questions about their child, not just give them scores, or just make them eligible for special education, because there is none of that once you're in the private sector.
Yes, everybody that knows that child wants to know the important information in layperson's terms that they can resonate with. And they want to know how those skills, strengths or weaknesses, manifest.
Right.
What does that mean in the classroom? What does that mean for life for them?
Yeah.
Beyond the learning disability or whatever it is, what does that individual's, profile and their particular skill set means? And that's different from group research, what group research says sometimes, because these are individuals, not group data.
Right. Okay. So talk a little bit about the kind of how this program works, and who would be, what's the pitch for the School Neuropsychology Institute, really? Who is it for? What do they get? When can they start? What are the benefits? And then whatever else is coming with the School Neuropsych Institute and beyond, the kinds of things that you're involved in.
Sure. Before I go there, I wanted to also address that school neuropsychology in school setting is a difficult one.
Yeah.
And it takes some promotion. I've developed a letter to supervisors about some of the benefits and the need to have these services in the school. So I know we're clear about the benefits in private practice, right? It makes you incredibly marketable to have these skills. But in the schools, if you need some help with that, reach out to me. We'll try to do that, because it will take some promotion, and it has happened. Sometimes there will be a position for the school neuropsychologist to do these types of evals. So It can happen. So the program, we offer a lot of different types of continuing education, but we're talking now about the postgraduate school neuropsychology program. It begins in August every year and ends in June. And when I say August is more self-guided. There's videos to watch and those sorts of things. After that, starting in September, it's one weekend a month. So you are live online with experts all over. Some are some of the core faculty and supervisors that are involved with the School Neuropsychology Institute, but there are other experts throughout that do our workshops. And we try to have them focused on the practitioner aspect of all of the neuroanatomy and theory that they are also talking about as well. So it's 1 weekend a month. There's online, you can see the whole course, the sequence of study. You also have group supervision once a month. And then you have as much individual clinical supervision as you need because you are required to do cases throughout and present cases and defend your decisions that you made while you did the evaluation and wrote the report. So that is another aspect of it. And there are, you have to show competency. Mm-hmm. There's quizzes, there's a final, there's a written, there's a final oral. And that is really the goal is, can I now use this? Have I really learned it? And can I use it with children? So that's what else. So registration opens in January every year, and you can apply through August. There's an application process, short application process that you go through. Is that enough information about the program in particular? Is there any other?
No, I think, and there's a lot of information on the website, right?
Yes, a lot of information. I mean, you can see the exact dates of the lectures next year. The fees are there, the program requirements, the textbooks that we recommend, and also the assessments. You'll be learning probably some assessments that you don't know. We have a test kit library where we can send a certain bank of tests back and forth if you want to try something. Before you invest in it. But that's the other thing is I think it'll get you outside of I have to do this assessment because it's the one I know, and I have to do that whole assessment every single time with every single child.
Yeah.
You will think differently about what does this child need? And I'm going to go get the test that's going to give me the information that I need.
Yep.
So you'll be exposed to a different way of thinking about what tests you choose. And also how to write your reports. We focus on the big picture, not having to repeat the score and ranges, but this is what this means for the child. This is what it means for how they process information and what that's going to mean for them in the classroom. Dr. Miller developed the PsychWriter Pro about a year ago. So the report writing task for our course is a bit easier because the program is really good at tabling data in a way that matches a neuropsychological perspective and, assists with getting things in the right places. So, and it's got, I don't even know, almost any assessment that you would want to integrate is in the system by now. So that's helpful in this transition to writing reports in a different way that is hard at first.
Yeah. I think I need to try that PsychWriter Pro. I just have to make sure all the tests I give are in it. I think at NASP, he was like, well, what test isn't in it? And because I really like the TILs, and I was like, the TILs isn't in it, but maybe it's in it by now. But
might be, or maybe you just, throw that table in after you run it.
Yeah. Or I could
the rest of the table.
I can tell him to throw it in.
Yeah. Or you might have to throw it in if it's not in there for now. But
yeah,
he's pretty receptive, and working with the programmer to try to get more in.
Yeah.
The future. We're having a faculty retreat in Minnesota next weekend, so we are super excited to plan. After next weekend, I might have more things to say, but some things that are considered. One is maybe having people come back together for the November meeting. It's again, that might be too much of a cost for some people, and we get that, but we also, want to give the opportunity for people to see each other in person. I think there's something powerful about meeting your cohort from across the United States. We have international students too. If they can come to November, who knows, but some have in the past. So it's nice to all be together in person. We are thinking about offering a report writing workshop that's separate from the program. That would be an addition. We are thinking about an additional year option for people that want to, that is just supervision. So you go through the program, you learn all these skills, you're still kind of, figuring out how it's going to fit into your real life.
Mm-hmm.
So we're thinking about an option of just supervision for an additional year.
Yep.
And we're thinking about maybe an early childhood offering.
Huh.
So
Very cool.
all to be determined.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just on that note, I'm just thinking like, what would I want? Well, I would love to like literally retake the program, but I would need to be charged something, but not the whole thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, because if I've paid the alumni fee to be able to watch it, and I like have not done anything. I pay it every year and I don't do it, like, because there's no accountability, like I'm looking forward to my clinician doing it because I'm like, maybe I will just audit it live with her, like, but I feel like I would love to have more a refresh, or like some access back to supervision, or just more, I took what, like 10 years ago I took this. It was so long ago. It was like, maybe if it was more, it was like, what has it really been that long? I took in like 2010, 14 years.
14 years.
Jeez.
Yes. And I guess that goes back to our discussion earlier about just doing the CEs, which again is fine. You might, between CEs and supervision, you might be able to get that, but this kind of forces you to do it. It forces you to focus on it, devote time to it, and integrate it while it's all still fresh in your mind.
Right.
But yes, I was going to mention the alumni club. That's a great benefit every year. You can listen to all the updates every year that you are in the alumni club.
I'm going to do it this year.
If you want, you can earn CEs for reading your best practices book.
Okay. Well, I'm going to do it. I'm also going to listen to Peg Dawson's, because I was talking to Jenny and she was like, I listened to Peg Dawson's keynote, and I was like, oh, I haven't done that yet. I really need to do that before it expires. I had to get my CEs.
Yes, from the conference. Yes. And that's the other thing, we have the conference every year, which is great because you attend live, again, if you want to be really focused, attend live.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Schedule and attend, but you have 4 months to listen to the other one that you missed that was opposite, or something that you couldn't go to. So you just have to get yourself to do it.
Exactly. Yeah, I definitely listened live to, like, I blocked my days out for that, but then it's going back to those other ones that I just like forget to do.
Yes.
And I was also going to say, a couple of years ago, you had the pre-conference did a bunch of different people talking about report writing from like different perspectives. I loved that. That was fabulous. I took nuggets from every single one of them. So when you were talking about doing just like a report writing, like workshop or whatever, that it was super good. So.
And that was a very well received pre-conference. So that is what spurred this idea to offer something like that in a bit more comprehensive way, because it seemed to resonate with people.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot to mention one thing.
Yes.
There is a new book that published by Routledge sometime, I think, next year. It's about halfway done at this point. Denise Miracle, Dan Miller, Chris Bedford, myself, and Wendy Johnson are editors, but it's a neurodevelopmental disorders book. So it's neurodevelopmental disorders in children and adolescents, a pediatric treatment guide. So this book is about some of the less common neurodevelopmental disorders. So like extreme prematurity, meningitis, diabetes, sickle cell anemia, chromosomal deletions. That is much more frequently seen now that we're able to diagnose those. So these are all of those less common, but more frequently appearing conditions in children. More children survive neurological insult and neurological trauma now. So we are seeing more of these types of children in school. And so it is about, it'll be a very nice way for individuals to learn about some of those more low incidence, but pretty neurologically complex disorders that we see in schools and private practice.
Yeah. How cool. Great. Well, I mean, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been lovely talking to you. I wish we could go on forever and ever, but we have things we have to do. But yeah, so you can be found at schoolneuropsych.com. Yes.
Yes.
And sure your email is.
Yes, there's a couple ways to research me. If you go on the website, there's a link to info at schoolneuropsych.com. I see those, but you can also email me directly at Dr. Gettman, DRGETTMAN at schoolneuropsych.com as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. It's been lovely talking to you, and I am certain we will be in touch. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jana.
All right. Thanks for listening to the Empower LEP podcast with Dr. Julie Gettman. Thank you for listening to the Empower LEP podcast. Episodes can be found at empowerlep.com. If you liked what you heard, please leave a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast player. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any questions for me, don't hesitate to connect. I would love to learn more. I can be found at jana@empowerlep.com.